Well, thank you so much, Zetta, for very quickly taking the call and showing up and talking to this wonderful group. You've heard a little bit and can see how cool they are and what great work
Yes.
they're doing. So I briefly, I'm going to mostly let Zetta talk here, but I've known Zetta since, did we ever figure this out?
Either 2000 or 2001.
Right. So about 20 years. And I think the thing that, so when I was working at Lee and Low as an editor, Zetta sent me some stories. One of them, I think this one, right? Ruined my heart. Totally got me. It's a girl whose parents are divorced and who needs reassurance basically from her dad. I think he's having a new relationship, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that like he still has room in his heart. We shared that experience um and then became good friends and have seen each other through a lot of our different life experiences.
Yes.
And yeah, Zetta, as everyone knows, including Zetta, I will sing Zetta's praises for one of
Let the girls come home.
my favorite authors in the world and people in the world. Um, Super inspiring. And so I just want to talk to Zetta about kind of your path. Oh, and then Zetta ended up publishing after I left this book, Bird, with Lee and Low, and the honor award winner, right, of the New Voices Award.
Yeah.
So Zetta, tell me how you kind of got into writing children's books.
It was sort of accidental. It was certainly not intentional in terms of what I had intended as a writer. I was planning to write for adults, and I quit graduate school for a year so I could write my first adult novel, One Eye Open. And I was writing it in Canada, and I was submitting it to agents there and submitting it to agents in the US. And I was getting a lot of positive feedback and people asking to see the manuscript. And I, for the first and last time in my life, stopped writing because I thought, well, I have finished my magnum opus and I'm just going to wait for this 6-figure contract to come in, and then I'll never go back to graduate school and I'll just be a writer like I've always wanted. And then there was absolute silence. So in those 6 months when I stopped writing, I was still working with kids because I've worked with kids for 30 years. And I was teaching creative writing at the Frederick Douglass Creative Arts Center in Harlem, and was teaching kids a section on picture books, and so made a few examples for them, which you later explained to me were technically not picture books because they were 6,000 to 8,000 words long. So they were more chapter books, but I imagined them as being illustrated books. And I showed them to the kids I was teaching, and they loved them. And I just sort of kept going. I tend to do that when I'm trying something new. When I started to write plays, I wrote 20 plays, and then I stopped and moved on and wrote something else, tried something else. So I wrote about 20 picture books that I thought were picture books and started sending them out. And you were one of the first editors that I reached out to. You were certainly the only editor that wrote me back and said, why don't we meet for lunch? And then you broke some things down for me about the industry and formatting and some of the rules. And then you left Lee and Low. So we never actually got to work together professionally at a traditional press, but you know, that first book did really well. And I thought once again that editors and agents would come knocking, and they didn't. And I kept sending material out to them and they weren't interested. And I have a PhD in American Studies. I know how to do research. And I started just looking into racial disparities in publishing and found the Cooperative Children's Book Center, which compiles annual statistics. And that meant I could stop taking it personally. Because when you face rejection over and over and over, you know, it feels very personal. It feels like someone is saying, you're not quite good enough. And I never had an editor who sent me a nasty letter. I never had anyone who said, you know, you just, you should find another career option. Generally, people would say, you know, you write beautifully. And then they would say things like, there's no market for your work. And I just knew that that wasn't true. So my cousin actually suggested that I try self-publishing. And initially I looked down my nose at it, as I think many people do, and just thought, you know, I'm not that desperate, and I'm not gonna be that person trying to hustle folks to buy their book out the trunk of their car. But then, you know, I saw another friend, Pam Booker, who had self-published a really beautiful book. And she's someone I respect a lot, someone I knew from graduate school. And it made me think twice about what self-publishing really was, that, you know, it's not a vanity project. You're not just doing it because you want to see your name on a book. You know, I was writing for kids. The kids that I worked with needed to see their realities reflected in the books they were reading. And the traditional industry wasn't doing that for them. So started looking into different print-on-demand platforms, started out with Lulu and then switched to CreateSpace, which was acquired by Amazon and is now Kindle Direct Publishing. And I'm about to self-publish a picture book probably this week or next week. Thank you for your feedback once again, my editor friend. And have another book that I'm working on with another illustrator, and have still managed here and there to sell books to traditional publishers. I got an agent in 2016 through DV Pit, which is an online sort of Twitter initiative to help marginalized writers connect with editors and agents. And Jen sold 4 books, including my Dragon series, which was doing really well and has sold, I think, over 70,000 copies. And it's up for Readers Awards, Young Readers' Choice Awards in 6 states, I think, at this point, and a couple of provinces in Canada. And Random has dropped the series. So I would say that my career has been sort of, if there's a pattern, it's learn the rules, follow the rules, get screwed over by the rules, break the rules, make new rules, and just try to operate on multiple fronts. So I don't tell people not to bother trying to get published traditionally. That's certainly one of the ways that I'm able to write full time, is that you get the advance money, and that enables me then to work on other projects that mean a lot to me. I have sort of my 2 lists, my 2 columns of things I've written that I know will never get picked up by a traditional publisher, and things I've written that have perhaps more commercial appeal that my agent might be able to sell. And I'm working on one of those projects right now. And yeah, I think that's basically my career in a nutshell.
Awesome. What year was it when you started self-publishing? Do you remember?
2014.
2014.
Yeah.
How many books have you indie published since then?
Oh my goodness. Looking at my list here, I am coming up on, so In the City, on my block, which I'm about to do, that will be number 29. And then I have a book, We Are Africans, that will be number 30.
Wow.
For kids, for young readers.
You had a friend once who said you drop books like Prince drops records, which is
yeah.
bad thing to say, but I thought, let's see if I can do this without showing the entire world all of my anyway. But just a little quick kind of scroll through, you know, the books, and this is just categories, right? So like this one, A Place Inside of Me, this is one of your traditionally published books that's coming out.
Right, that comes out this summer from FSG.
Okay. Do you want to say anything, since that's what we went to, about kind of how that happened? And
yeah, that was one of those stories I wrote around the time that I met you. I wrote it in 2001, I think, and sent it out, and it got rejected over and over again. So it was one of those stories that sat on my hard drive for a long time. And then I got an agent in 2016, and I shared it with her, and she thought it was too sad, which is something I hear very often. And then in I guess it was still 2016, Philando Castile was shot and killed by police, and Alton Sterling as well, I think within just a couple of days of each other. And because the poem has a couple of passages that talk about rage and sorrow, and one of them has a reference to experiencing pain that, you know, cuts through me the way a bullet goes through concrete and flesh. My agent emailed me and said, you know, that story you wrote that I thought was too sad, I think it actually would be really great if kids had that book in their hands right now. And so she sent it to a couple of editors. One was a Black man. Actually, he was a publisher, not an editor. And he was too busy to look at it. And the other editor was Grace Kendall, a white woman. And she read it and apparently had a very emotional response, and everybody in her office was reading it and crying. And so, you know, acquired it. So that was in 2016, and it is coming out this summer, 2020. Took a very long time, but it was her idea to sort of take the stanzas and work it into, use the illustrations to make it a protest narrative. which I was a little wary of at first because publishing loves to jump on police brutality as a trend, a way to make money. And that had not been my intention when I wrote the poem. But I also wrote it 20 years ago, so I was pretty open to some ideas. And she picked a debut illustrator, Noah Denman, who picked or decided to have the protagonist be a very young African-American girl, about 5 years old, and each emotion articulated in the poem was represented by an animal. So the first page, there is joy inside of me, had like a bunny rabbit hopping across a rather suburban setting. And I was like, that's really not what's happening in this poem. And because the poem does have some kind of, I wouldn't say graphic language, but much more mature language, I said, let's age it up and have the protagonist be a 9 or 10-year-old boy, and he's on his skateboard and he's going through his neighborhood. And if we move some of the stanzas around, we can make the protest narrative work. And so that's what we ended up doing. And then Tatiana Jefferson was shot, I believe last fall or last summer. And I asked if the illustrator would make the victim of the police shooting depicted in the book a woman. And it's dedicated to Zion, who is her young nephew who witnessed her being shot by police in her home while they were playing video games, because a police officer approached and did not announce that he was a police officer. So I think one of the challenges for me is that I do identify, I write for kids, and I'm happy to own that. But I don't necessarily identify as a children's book author always, because I think people have a very limited idea of what that means. And when I talk to other people who are writing, I write animal stories and I write fun and cute stories, but those aren't the stories that traditional editors acquire. And so it ends up looking like I've either got like a chip on my shoulder, or I'm only writing about oppression, because Bird is about a boy whose brother dies of addiction. And so if you only looked at the traditionally published books, it would look as though I had a very limited range. I'm like some kind of one-trick pony, and I'm not. I have this wide range, but you would only know that if you've read my self-published works as well. And I think most people have not. So that's a challenge, I think. And people often think of me as a debut author. Somebody on Twitter listed me as a 2020 debut author, and I was like, wow, no. Noah, the illustrator of the book, and she just knocked it out of the park. I hope she gets a Caldecott for this book. Would be awesome, because it's beautifully illustrated. We can flip through it if there's time later on.
Yeah, I'm sure people would love to see it, and the one you sent to me too, I think. Well, I want to give other people here an option. We got a great group with lots of questions and different kind of career goals and aspirations, and actually Angela's starting to develop kind of resources, or the idea of some kind of workshop or something to help support kind of the emotional journey of being a writer, and especially for authors of color. So anybody who wants to, there's not that many of us. Does anybody have a question you want to ask Zetta? And I can keep going.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing up the workshop, because I think Zetta's a really good person to ask about this, given the journey that you've had with publishing, whether traditional or self-publishing, and kind of being put in that box that you didn't ask to be put into. What would you say to aspiring authors who, how can they avoid that? Can they avoid it, given just the way that the industry is and the way that it likes to jump on trends, as they like to call them, in African-American literature or work from African-Americans? I mean, I would ask, what would you say to them to help them avoid that? Or what would you say to them to say, if this does happen to you, this is how you can turn it into a strength? Because I think a lot of times we look at some things and automatically think of it as a weakness and don't really give it enough pause to think of no, I could actually use this to my benefit or to others' benefit. I hope that makes sense. I don't know, some semblance of a question in there.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So I would have to say that I am one of those people who does not advocate for playing the game. And it is a game, and the game is rigged. And so I would say don't be naive and go into the industry understanding what it is, and know that it has limitations. But but also go into it with your own definition of success. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think it can be difficult. There's somebody that I was once friends with and I'm no longer friends with who was at BCFA, and she sort of became a very different person when she was in that MFA program. And I'm not talking about her like evolution as a writer, but just being around so many other authors, almost all of whom were white, who were getting six-figure deals for books that she thought were garbage, was just eating away at her. And, you know, she'd have to share a room and listen to people talk about their deals and their agent got them this and that. And they were flown to this conference and they had a chauffeur pick them up and da, 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 da. And if you sort of get sucked into that, then it, I won't say it will destroy you, but it does not necessarily bring out the best in you. And what you will end up doing is changing your writing in order to fit the mold that will earn you commercial success. And that's ultimately what she did. And that's one of the reasons we're no longer friends, but I've been on a couple of panels with her recently and she has said how much she regrets that. So I think you probably have to be sort of gentle with yourself and accept that you are going to have different faces that you wear in different places. You know, we wear the mask, it still holds true. I'm not talking about the pandemic. I'm, you know, just generally we have to accommodate folks. And, you know, the publishing industry is dominated by straight, white, cisgender women who don't have disabilities. And that's not just editors and marketers and publicists and agents. That's also book reviewers, that's librarians, that's teachers, that's booksellers. They dominate the entire children's literature community, scholars as well. So in some ways, a person's success is very much dependent on how much they appeal to and or appease white women. So if that is not something you're good at, you might want to, what my former friend used to say, you have to have the soft skills to get ahead in publishing, which, you know, we could think of some other euphemisms for that, but, you know, basically you have to sort of, if you want to be on the New York Times bestseller list, if you want the six-figure deals, you know, you can't be contrary. You know, it's like that study that came out that said most people that are hired in companies, it's based on cultural fit, right? Do you fit with the culture of the company? So publishing has a culture and the culture is based on the people that dominate the industry. So there are going to be times where if you want to gain access to certain spaces, you're going to have to perform a certain way. And for some people that's distasteful. For me personally, I'm not that good at it. And I have found that I can be myself and it will limit my success according to, you know, sales and advances and that sort of thing. But I sleep very well at night and I don't have to get up on a panel and talk about how much I regret X and Y, because I don't. Now, I also don't have kids and my former friend does. And, you know, maybe if I had dependents, I would be making different choices. So I can acknowledge that too. But I would say, you know, if you go into it with a clear sense of what would be success to you. So after that first adult novel I wrote went nowhere, I had to say to myself, you know, well, if you never get an agent, are you still going to write? And the answer was yes. And if you never get a six-figure advance, are you still going to write? And the answer was yes. And if I never win awards, I wrote a blog post years ago called Farewell Coretta, when it became very clear I was never going to win a Coretta Scott King Award. And I now understand why. I see how the dynamics of that committee work. You know, but if you can let go of that and just think about, well, why are you doing what you're doing? And I started out writing to give kids stories that I thought they needed. And those are the same stories I didn't have when I was growing up that I needed. So as long as I'm able to write what I want, how I want, when I want, then I consider myself successful. And I am not part of the clique, and I am not going to win all kinds of awards, and I'm not going to be on the Today Show and NPR. And, you know, you see the same people over and over and over again. And sometimes I have to turn the channel because, boy, there's a whole lot of cooning going on. But, you know, you just have to decide what you're comfortable with. And once you're clear on that, and you can keep checking in with yourself, but once you're clear on that, then I think that makes things a lot easier. It's not a meritocracy. I always tell people, start there. It's not a meritocracy. So once you understand that, then it's sort of easier going forward.
Yeah, thank you for all that honesty, which I think is
long answer.
How do you keep yourself going? Like, I mean, that all makes a lot of sense. And how do you not get so beaten down, or even just by changing the channel or whatever?
Well, you know all too well that I have my moments. And I am lucky that I have friends who will let me rant for a little while when somebody who's writing absolute trash got $1 million deal. But you know, I keep circling back to the idea. It is not a meritocracy. You know, I am not the perfect writer. I have a lot of evolving to do in terms of my craft, but I've written some things that are pretty good. And I see myself getting better as I try new things. And I like that I do try new things. I don't just stick with the same old, same old. And you know, like right now, I just feel really fortunate. I have been able to live where I want to live, and I live alone, and I have, you know, resources and the means to feed myself and clothe myself. I usually travel a lot when it's not a pandemic. I'm sort of living this self-directed life, and that really was what I wanted. And so I'm doing what I wanted. You know, I did get a PhD. I was a professor for a while. You know, I've tried some things, and you know, you keep coming back to what it is you want. I want to get better as a writer. I want to tell the stories that aren't being told right now. And you know, I am not going to look to an industry that I know to be racist and expect them to embrace a narrative about 4 teenage Black girls accused of murder. If a publisher is interested in that story, then I have to be careful, because why are they interested in that story? Because they aren't going to market it to Black folks. They're marketing it to white readers. And you have to be careful about feeding into existing appetites for Black pathology. But you know, you guys, you let me rant for a little while, and then we take a deep breath, and it helps when you know you're not the only one. When you're by yourself and you're getting rejected, you just think there's something wrong with me, and then you see it's part of a larger structure. It's systemic. There are systems at work, not just a few bad apples, and that really liberates me, I think, and makes me know that I can just do what I want.
And we're so glad you do. Anybody else have a question for Zetta?
I have one. Do you feel like you've found a community of, I mean, of course there's Laura and all of us, but do you feel like you found a community of people who support you in your vision? Because I mean, a lot of what you're saying is like counter narrative to the rest of the industry in some ways, and being able to forge your own path.
Right.
And you feel like you have enough allies in that.
Right.
Or in that space.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say when you really break down what the children's literature community is, it's sort of these overlapping groups, right? So you have the publishing professionals themselves, and not all of them are terrible people, right? There are some really nice people. I've had the good fortune to work with some great people. And then you have children's literature scholars. So I think the fact that I was a scholar for a while, not a children's literature scholar, but I sort of dabbled in that a bit. I joined CHLA for a little while, a professional association. I was attending some conferences, and the professor friends of mine are radical. They tend to think outside the box, and they teach my work. So that's significant. And then within this children's scholar community, you have people who study children's literature, you have library science professors, and you have education professors. And those 3 groups don't necessarily even hang out with each other, but there's sort of some cross-pollinating that goes on there. So there's that. And then you have librarians, and librarians are awesome. So you have public librarians, and I've been invited to do conferences and workshops for public librarians. The Brooklyn Public Library kept me afloat for a really long time, and they're fantastic. And they didn't care whether I was talking about a self-published book or a traditionally published book. They just knew that I was good with kids, and they could send me into a school, and I could handle 300 kids in an auditorium. And then you have parents and teachers. So, and within the teaching group, again, you have, you know, teachers who are doing ELA, and you have teachers who are doing social studies, but are interested in people who write historical fiction. So you sort of have these overlapping groups of people, and then you have other writers. So I would say probably my smallest group of friends is in the writer category. And I think that's probably a good thing. And I would say of my writer friends, half of them don't write for kids. So when I'm talking to my writer friends, there's no competition, there's no kind of cattiness or anything. Most of the time, you know, the only children's literature they're reading is mine. if they're reading mine, and some of them aren't. So I have my rad women, Laura and Janine and Maya, Natalie. They're all on the West Coast. There are some, you know, I don't have to tell you, there are some pretty awesome people out there. I didn't find as many of those folks in New York City, which was more challenging. But there are traditionally published authors who are not in the clique, right? They're not the top 5. And those people are wonderful. The Brown Bookshelf, everybody that's a part of that, those are fantastic people. You see them at conferences if you get to go to conferences. So I feel as though I have my friend Kate who reads everything that I write, and she's a writer and a lawyer who lives in Nova Scotia. So I have individuals that I can count on. I'm a Scorpio, so I'm not generally a person who wants to, like, I'm not a joiner. I don't want to be a part of a big group of anything. But I do find that because the children's literature community is so diverse in terms of profession, I would say it's pretty easy to find who the radical folks are, because the radical librarians all know each other, right? If you don't follow Reading While White, you should check out their blog. Those are the radical librarians. And, you know who the radical professors are, and then you find out who the radical editors are. There are a couple, not that many. And then you know who the folks are self-publishing and doing radical stuff that way. So I feel as though I have a community that I can tap into when I need it. And it's also a way to make money, you know, like having multiple income streams is important, not only in a pandemic, but, you know, waiting on an advance. So even if my agent, you know, she sold the book in September, we didn't get that money until March. So, and then, you know, we're supposed to get the rest of it in November, but it'll probably be next April. So it's important to have opportunities to speak, opportunities to do workshops, opportunities when you're self-publishing, sometimes to sell your own books. Yeah, I think that's what's been sustaining for me.
Excellent. And actually, Zetta, quickly, I think if you could talk through just the kind of what it takes for you when you do indie publish your books, like where you find illustrators, what the steps are, how long it takes you, how much it costs, if you're willing.
Yeah. So I have done 7 or 8 books now with Purple Wong, and she's this fantastic illustrator that I found through Upwork. And then she asked me to move to freelancer.com. Yeah. And she did Benny Doesn't Like to Be Hugged and I Love Snow and all those books. And yeah, I just found her because, you know, I used Upwork. I posted a job notice and then people bid on the job, and I asked to see their portfolios. I make sure that they know how to draw Black children. And yeah, that's how I found her. That's how I found Charity Russell. That's how I found, Babs, who did Fox and Crow. I did 2 books with Babs. Yep, Charity did most of the books in the City Kids series. All of them I found either through recommendations, and then I would usually say, if I find somebody outside of a freelancer site, then I would say, do you mind working on Upwork, so that you have an account, escrow account, so that once we agree on the terms and I say, when you turn in your first 10 sketches, I'll give you $500. When you turn in the finished illustrations, I'll give you another $500. Everybody has their own rate. Some people charge per illustration, some people charge per hour. I prefer charging by illustration because then I can say I need 8 or 10 or 12 or whatever. Cover art's the same thing. And like I said, I use Kindle Direct Publishing, which used to be CreateSpace, because it's kind of self-publishing for dummies. I know Maya and Matthew from Reflection Press, they prefer Ingram Spark. I found that site to be more technical, a little bit more complicated for me. But you know, Lulu also had really good quality. They were just a bit more expensive. Janine can talk about offset printing. I've never done that. But yeah, self-publishing for me at this point, it's fairly straightforward. Once I have my story, then, you know, if I'm either going to work with an existing illustrator that's already done something for me, that's great. I'm working with a brand new Black woman illustrator in Florida. And we started the project in November, and it was due end of January in time for Black History Month, and I still don't have it, and it's May. And you know, this is our first book together, and maybe we'll do another book, maybe not. But it's her first book, I think, which means she's probably agonizing over every illustration. And it's a pandemic, so God only knows what's happening with her in Florida. But yeah, was there anything specific you wanted to know about a particular
That's a
book?
good overview. I don't know. Is anybody else curious about that or other things? Yeah, Carmen.
Yeah, I just wonder, it's cool to just listen to like the process and finding an illustrator. And I'm curious about how you sell the book. Because I know in the early 2000s, I self-published a book of poetry. And it was a different time. You know, I don't think things like Amazon or the online presence wasn't as big, but it was really daunting to try to take that task on. And so I'm just curious how you actually sell the book.
Yeah, I mean, it still is daunting. Social media helps a lot. And having sort of an established reputation helps a lot because there are people who are looking for sort of my next book at this point. But there are also millions of people who don't know who I am and have never heard of me and aren't going to take a chance even if they see something interesting on social media. So promotion and marketing is still a big issue. I would say that sales is my least favorite thing to talk about because I think most of the books, all of the books that I self-publish, I don't really care if they sell. For me, in some ways, self-publishing these books, because they are books for kids, is a way of proving to the world what the publishing industry is rejecting. So when I started out, that was really what I wanted to do, was to say, oh, so the publishing industry tells you we just can't find the stories, or writers just aren't sending us anything, you know, that's well written. And, you know, they had all these excuses. And then I could say, well, here are the books of mine that I submitted that got rejected over and over again. And, oh, that just got picked up for the Scripps National Spelling Bee. And, oh, that just got picked up for the ALA Great Stories Club. And, oh, look at that. Teaching for Change is using this book at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Like, you know, every time you can say something like that, and you can only say it if the book exists, right? So for me, right now, I have 20 picture book stories on my hard drive. Are all of those stories ever going to see the light of day? I don't know, probably not. I mean, even if a third of them got picked up by a traditional publisher, that still leaves me with 20 stories, and I don't probably have the means or the stamina to self-publish all of them myself. But when I do publish a book, I don't generally think about sales. Or if when you publish through Kindle Direct, you get a monthly royalty statement, and you can check your sales on a daily basis, which I do. And I would say when I started out, I might have gotten somewhere between $30 and $50 a month in royalties. And then the past year, I was making somewhere between $300 and $800 a month in royalties. So you can't always see which title is being purchased or by whom, but you know what kind of volume you're moving. And I think you have to give a book time. Like, I think we get so invested in the traditional publishing industry's model, and people want to see a book jump onto the New York Times bestseller list. And, you know, there are so many factors behind how that happens. I'm happy if a book sells a few dozen copies, and that's the case for some of my titles. So if I have self-published close to 30 titles, not even half of them have earned out. You know, not even half of them have made enough in sales to cover the cost of production. But I don't have regrets about making any of them. And I generally start a project only if I have the means at the time to finish the project. I never like overextend myself thinking, but if I sell, you know, 500,000 copies, then it'll pay for da 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 da. That isn't part of my success definition. But when a book does exist, it can circulate in ways that are beyond your expectations. And so I always feel as though, you know, when you publish a book, when you're telling a story, you're sowing seeds and you sort of toss it out into the world and you don't know where it's going to land. And it can get into the hands of people you didn't expect it to. Yeah, I guess that's as much as I can say about sales. Sorry.
That's all right. We have, let's see, chat. garments, maybe selling is the best word. How do you get it out there? Nicole said maybe distribution is the question. But I think you kind of, I don't know if you want to say anything in response to those.
Well, indie books are available through Baker and Taylor and Ingram. They're available through distribution. So the problem is not that they're not available. The problem is that bookstores most indie bookstores refuse to carry self-published books. They will not support indie authors except through consignment, which is ridiculous. So most of my sales certainly are online. And I have like 1 or 2 bookstores that are willing to stock my books. I noticed that this new site, bookshop.org, which is trying to compete with Amazon, they have all of my indie books listed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I might try to order one just to see what happens. Because I know in Brooklyn, there was a big indie store, and I called them and said, I'd like to order, The Last Bunny in Brooklyn by Zetta Elliott, and they wanted a deposit up front. They wouldn't even take the order unless, I had paid up front for it, because they can't return the book to the distributor. And that's what bookstores rely upon, is ordering 50 books, selling 2, and returning 48 to the distributor to get their money back. So distribution for me is not technically the problem. It's more the bias and the unwillingness of indie bookstores to support indie authors, even though they themselves identify as indies.
Right. And I think because you use Amazon, I know I was at an event where I was trying to get the bookstore to have your books, and they wouldn't because they're produced through, Amazon.
Yeah, but did they have Janine's book? Did they have Maya and Matthew's book? No. So, they're full of it, basically.
No.
It's not
I know,
just
and at the time
Amazon.
they said, we're going to wait for Dragons in the Bag because that's with Random House. And I was like, yeah, but the publishers are institutionally racist. So you can point your finger at Amazon, but the systems that bring the books to the world.
Yeah, I think it's pretty hard for bookstores to claim the moral high ground and say they don't want to support Amazon because, like I said, the whole entire system is dominated by white women. And so to say that anyone who's not a white woman who's been shut out of this entire system and then grasps at whatever opportunities they can find to make their books, and then you're going to say to them, well, you chose Amazon and therefore da da da. And I respect a bookstore's prerogative. I don't have a problem with them. But then I would say, well, are you supporting people who publish through Ingram or Lulu or do offset printing? And the answer is no, they don't. So it's disingenuous of them to use Amazon as their excuse, I think.
Yeah. And Natalie,
plus, if they don't carry the books, then people go to Amazon and buy them. So
right, exactly. Natalie, you were going to say something before, and I think you'd be an interesting voice in this topic as well.
Yes, it was just adding to the question you asked, Zetta. I was very interested in, how can I say that, the dynamic when you work with an illustrator. So what I'm trying to get at is how much input do you provide? I understand that if you're working with a first-time illustrator, they probably have lots of questions for you because they're so afraid to make a mistake. Because I tend to view the collaboration between a writer and illustrator as the illustrator will be able to add his or her own spin to the story, in that, they're able with images sometimes to bring in stuff that are in the story, but that you don't necessarily get at first glance. So I'm always excited to kind of see where the imagination goes when they read, the words that you put on paper. But at the same time, I'm wondering, okay, so how technical does it get when you give them instructions? And does it get to the point where you have to give them,
reference
hints? Yeah, like hints on the perspective. Like I had someone once ask me, what angle do you want for this? And what you like? Like basically it was, the person was asking me to break down their own work, but in a way that was, I was excited about working with someone to see what they will, how they will approach it first, and then I can give my feedback. But yeah, so I don't know how that works for you.
Yeah, I have found that it is more efficient for me to be as explicit as possible at the outset in order to save all of us time. Because if you just say to your illustrator, well, what do you think? Let's see what you come up with. Then they go away and spend all this time coming up with ideas that may ultimately be of zero use to you in a book. And most of the illustrators I work with, I think, don't have a lot of experience with children's literature. So that obviously makes a difference. But for me to say to somebody, I generally make a list of illustrations, and then I give them reference photos, and I actually do say what perspective I want. It's when I was working with Purple at the outset, I had to say, please, if there are too many white children, please add some Asian children. We need some kids with disabilities. We need some visibly queer folks in here. We need, I don't have to do that anymore because we've done so many books that she does it automatically now. But I might still have to say to her, we haven't had anyone wearing hijab. So can you please go back and do that? And working with Noah on A Place Inside of Me, which is a traditionally published book. Normally you don't get any say on the illustrations, but Grace Kendall has an author first policy. So every decision went by me first, which took a very long time, but at least I got to say on every single page, change this, change this, change this, change this. I mean, I've never had that experience with a traditional publisher before. And there were a couple of things I wasn't happy with, but I was just like, you know what, you've given me everything else. So we're going to go with that. That's okay. But yeah, I do find that the more explicit you can be, like this young illustrator who is agonizing, part of the reason she's agonizing is probably because it's historical fiction. And so, she had to draw one scene that had like an overseer in the corner and indigenous folks in this other corner, and then enslaved people in the center. And she had the indigenous woman in this sort of like sexy Pocahontas Halloween costume. And I was just like, oh, wow, absolutely not. But instead of saying to her, can you go do some research on what, indigenous women in colonial era Pennsylvania were, I did that. I did the search and found some examples and said, here's something you could work with. So I find the more work that I can do, that saves the illustrator time. And if you end up working with an illustrator who's like, you're destroying my vision, chances are that they aren't going to be working on Freelancer or Upwork because, you're not really collaborators, you're the client, and the client gets what the client wants. So.
Excellent. I want to just show a ton of your books, but I don't want to take advantage of your time. I feel like I want everyone who is here or sees this to like know, wow, like for me, Mother of the Sea, this is like Toni Morrison level writing. It is just, amazing. Or, The Ghost in the Castle set in England where, a girl and her cousin, is that right?
Yeah.
Meet ghosts of Africans who were, kind of
gifted.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, just the, where you go, and Milo's museum, which is, kind of the big one that Deborah Menkart and Teaching for Change support, right? Where Milo ends up creating her own museum because she doesn't see herself reflected in the museums that she goes to. I mean, it's just everyone. They're just also amazing.
Yeah.
Let's all unmute ourselves, and we're gonna let Zetta off the hook, but I'm sure she'll be happy to answer other questions if people have them. Or
sure. info@Zetta Elliott. You can give them my email address.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us. As always, that was so enlightening to me.
It's nice to see everybody, and good luck with all your projects. They sound fantastic, and you are in very capable hands. I so wish that I had been able to do a book with Laura back in the day. It might still happen.
Exactly. There's who knows what's ahead of us right now.
She's an extraordinary editor, and just the exception to just about every rule when it comes to editors. Yeah,
we're just going to create our own little publishing revolutionary alternative space. It's probably going to be in the West Coast. Maybe we'll lure you out here.
After the pandemic, we'll get together.
All right. Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Zetta.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That was really great.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Zetta.
Bye.
Bye.